Okay, I'm recording now, and today's lecture, which was voted by a slim majority to have the lecture over a class exercise, um, we will be talking about immigration and the economics of having an open border policy, which is exactly what we're going to have the debate on Friday. So I almost feel like I don't want to give you too much of just, here's exactly why we should have an open border, or here's exactly why we should not, because let's save that for Friday. Let's save the whys, the what's the most important issues for us as Americans, or for us as people. What do we believe is the right thing to do? That's above my pay grade. I'm not going to. Hopefully, I'm not going to weigh in on that. All I can really tell you is, what do economists say are the main economic issues involved? And in my mind, there's one really big issue that economists analyze, and they want to learn more about this. If we're talking about whether we should open borders and allow a free influx of labor, the question is, what does it do to labor markets in this country? And so we have thousands of economists who that's what they specialize in: labor markets, and other issues that are involved with labor. Leslie Stratton is the chair of the economics department at VCU, and she is a labor economist. I do not believe she is particularly interested in issues of immigration, but regardless, you go to any economics department in the country, there's probably going to be at least one person who's specializing in labor economics. That's how big of a field it is. I mean, just think of wages, like minimum wages, and education, and all these policies that matter. Uh, and you need economists to analyze what is the real effect of, I'll tell you a little bit about what Leslie studies. She's done some work on the division of labor in a household. Isn't that cool? So she has data where she can look at, like, sort of what effects may drive a household to have this unpaid labor, that if you have a married man and woman, if it shifts where the woman spending 10 hours per week doing unpaid labor, and then now she's only spending two. If Leslie's watching, I'm sorry, I'm not characterizing your work very well, but anyways, she looks at this issue of not just the paid labor, but the unpaid labor, and how the distribution of labor across a household can affect wages, and it can affect a lot of things. So, like, as the country changes in multiple dimensions, you can analyze that. Okay, what I want to talk about today is a more rudimentary, just let's make sure we all have an idea of what the labor market is, how economists think about it, so that when we talk about immigration, we have sort of that as our basis, a framework from which we can analyze policies. And we'll do it for two things, not just immigration, that's this week. Excuse me, minimum wage next week. Oh man, that's huge. Minimum wage, you gotta think like an economist there. You're going to say some things that don't really make sense if you don't at least have this basic knowledge of how labor markets work. No offense to you guys. No offense to the average Joe on the street, but sometimes their opinions about things like this, because they're not, they don't have, this sounds really elitist for me to even say this, but because their framework from which they start with is usually just based on their own personal experiences. And maybe they do remember one time they lost a job to a firm which hires undocumented immigrants, and they were really mad about that. And forever, for the rest of their life, they're going to support whichever candidate is the hardest on illegal immigration. And that sort of colors their thought even when it comes to legal immigration. They basically want there to be as few immigrants as possible. Anyways, we should try to avoid thinking narrowly and think as broadly as we can about not just us, but the entire economy. What are the effects of opening up a border to immigration. So we'll debate that Friday. Today we will go to my slides that talk about immigration. Okay, we see this. And I hope you forgive me a little bit because I actually thought we were going to do an exercise today. Okay, but I did have these slides prepared just in case. I'm going to be a little bit less prepared than I would have otherwise been. Let's talk about having an open border immigration policy. We'll talk about it Friday, but here's a little, remember, everyone has homework that's due. Everyone that's not participating in the debate, and that's all but two of you, I want you to give me homework, just like always, 2 economic issues. It could be both for open border or both against, or you could do 1 for, 1 against, and say you're undecided. But I would like you to, as always, submit those to me by class time Friday. Okay. First thing I want to talk about is labor supply. What is labor supply, guys? How is it determined? I'm gonna force you to interact here. This, you know, just because you don't want to do an exercise here, I'm still gonna say how is labor supply determined? The supply of labor, the people who are willing to do the labor, how is it determined?
Would it be like the number of workers available within, I guess, the population?
Okay, yes and no. So great start, because you can't have a labor supply unless you have workers that are available to supply labor. But let's get a little bit more technical now. I mean, Colin, you gave the answer I wanted someone to give, which is, let's not think of labor supply as a group of people who are willing to supply labor. That's the wrong way to think about it. Here's how you should think of labor supply from now on. If I'm asking you to do something and you want to make me happy, this is how I want you to think of labor supply. It's a graph. It's a function. Just like any other function, y equals x squared is a function. Labor supply is not a group of people. It's a function. And the axes of the graph on which it exists are Q, quantity, and W, wage. Although sometimes the W is dollars. It's not. For example, wages. I don't earn a wage. I have a salary, and you might say, well, how can I plot? If you plot salary in the same graph as wage, it's going to look really messed up. And anytime that's a small issue. You can always take someone's salary, divide it by the number of hours they've worked, and then get a wage back from that. So let's just say everyone has a wage and a Q. What is the quantity? It's the amount of labor somebody is willing to supply at that wage, not how much they're able to supply. That seems like a small difference, but I know for certain, at least in Chesterfield County, there are signs all over that say now hiring. Right? Unemployment is high right now. There's been a global pandemic for months. The economy, I don't even know what to say. I'm an economist, and I don't know what to say about the economy because there have been a lot of signs that say we're going into a recession, kind of a bad recession. Yet the stock market is pretty confident. The idea is that somehow the government will figure itself out and provide stimulus to people. So it's weird right now. But I will say this: there's plenty of jobs available at a low wage. They're not good paying jobs. They're low wage jobs, but they're available right now within 2 miles of my house. Labor supply can be analyzed for each job. You might, so let's be honest, we don't have time to analyze, working at McDonald's, working at Burger King, working at Wendy's, all separately and individually. Economists wouldn't do that. what do? They organize data into sectors. So here's the food service, the fast food, quick service sector. You could analyze that. You could analyze the total amount of hours somebody is willing to work in the fast food industry as a function of wage. What is the current wage, do you think, for these workers? Minimum wage is still only, gosh, I think it's still 7 something. We're talking about raising it to, wait, is that right? I should know what minimum wage is. It's under 10, whatever it is. So let's just say 10. Let's say they're desperate and they'll start you off at $10 per hour. Labor supply, oh, somebody gonna tell me I got a chat. I have to click this button to see the chat. Oh, Virginia raised it to 975. Thank you. Wow. It's probably because Democrats took control of both the House and Senate in Virginia, right? And the governor. So 975 is above the federal minimum wage, which is still 725. So now each state can have different minimum wages. So luckily I said $10 and I was right that it was at least $10. I mean, at most $10. So we should think of labor supply as how much, even me, because I don't know if I'm allowed to work because my VCU job, they don't want me to work somewhere else. But probably a lot of you guys currently don't have a job. Some of you do, some of you don't. But you could work at a fast food place for $10 per hour, but you choose not to. You have other things that you would rather do with your time. And maybe the money isn't that critical to you. You don't need that money, and it's not a lot of money. So, on the x-axis of this graph is the quantity that not just you, but everybody, how many hours they would be willing to work. And it's a function of wage. What if McDonald's paid you $20 per hour? What if they had a sign up said, now hiring in entry-level positions, $20 per hour? You think some people may be attracted by that? I do.
mean, yeah, like $20 an hour is, before taxes, roughly 40,000 a year. That's the median American income.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's a great point, Colin. I said $20 to try to make it sound high, but actually, if you're trying to live in this country and you have a family, that's kind of what you need is $20 per hour. But still, I'm thinking of maybe someone like a student, somebody. I'm imagining some of you listening now are not working, or if maybe you're working but a really small job, not too many hours. Some of you probably are working close to full time, and I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not that I don't know what to say. I guess I'm somehow impressed with a student who has to both work and go to class full time. I acknowledge that that's a difficult thing to do. My point was that there's probably somebody listening here who's like, I'm not going to work at McDonald's for $10 per hour. But if it was $20, like you could walk in, get a job, start working next week for $20 an hour, I think some people would respond to that. They would be like, oh yeah, I mean, I've got some time. I've got some time in the weekends. I could work part-time and make some money. What if it was $40 per hour? If they were hiring workers, all you had to do was flip burgers or sweep the floor or something for $40 per hour. You would see people like they would love to have that job. So even though there's signs outside their door that say now hiring, it's because they're now hiring at a certain wage, and there just isn't enough quantity supplied. I should have said this earlier, right? What is on the x-axis? It's quantity supplied. What's on the y-axis? Wage. So labor supply, I haven't even addressed. I'm sorry, this is taking me so long just to get this first bullet point across, but I wanted to say all this stuff anyway. Labor supply is a function which says, given any wage, what is the total quantity supplied of labor in this particular market? So you could take Richmond, fast food restaurants, wage of $10, add up the total amount of quantity supplied of each person who lives in the Richmond metropolitan area, and you would get a point on this graph, which is how much quantity supplied of labor there is at that wage of $10. And what I was conjecturing before was that if it jumped up to $20, there would be a lot more people, including students and some fully grown, adults, maybe even some families who like would switch their jobs. They're currently working, construction for uh, $14 an hour. But if McDonald's were hiring for $20, they would leave their job and go to McDonald's. So this is an equilibrium phenomenon. Some of you maybe have studied enough economics to know that. Should I look at the camera? That looks weird to me if I'm looking at the camera. I'd rather look slightly off the screen. Some of you know that when economists analyze a market, there are often like two phases that they would analyze. One is just this partial equilibrium. Partial equilibrium means I'm looking at one little section of the market and I'm ignoring everything else that might happen in the other parts. So in a partial equilibrium analysis of the fast food market in Richmond, you would ignore the fact that, well, maybe construction workers could raise their wage, or you would ignore the fact that, maybe people will move into Richmond from out of town. All of that gets ignored, and you just look at this, the effects of what would happen in this market if McDonald's offered a wage of $20 per hour. It would clearly be upward sloping. You would have an upward sloping labor supply. Why? Just because people change their minds if you make the wages high enough. People say, yeah, I'll do that. I wasn't going to before, but if you offer me enough wage, I'll do it. So that's really me just telling you right now what I think labor supply is. It's not just the available population of people who could work. That's called something too. That's called the labor. Is it just population? What's it called? Pool? Workforce? I don't know. There's a name for that. It's measured, usually done by survey. People survey how many people are looking for a job right now. Either have a job or are currently looking. That's called the labor workforce. What's it called? I should know that. Sorry. But labor supply is different. Labor supply is a function which says, given any wage, what's the total quantity supplied of labor for this market? And I really haven't answered my first bullet point yet. How is it determined? How does anyone decide how much labor they want to provide? Like for $10 an hour working at McDonald's, you got to make up your mind. Do you want that job or not? How do you make up that mind? How do you make up your mind? This is a real question. I'm wondering. I'm curious. I'm also curious if anybody works at a fast food, or fast food is pejorative, but any sort of industry that does this sort of service. It's sort of a quick service. You may even call it kind of the retail industry, because you're not manufacturing anything. You're just kind of servicing people who come into the door and want something. You give it to them, and then you're done.
I mean, I worked in the food service industry for about like 5 years now.
Okay, still?
No, I stopped when COVID started.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you decide that you want to do that? That you choose to do that? Like, what are the factors that enter into your decision?
I mean, personally, when I entered the industry, I did not have any education, and it's probably the highest paying, at least upward mobility industry that is available on like an entry level job. As a server, you can range to make up to like 20 to 30 an hour, depending on
Mhm.
the clientele.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so you decided to work in this industry because you wanted the money, right?
Yep.
And it was worth it to you to spend your time working than um, okay, so there's this trade-off that I believe. This is sort of one of the um, foundational assumptions of labor economics is that all people face some trade-off between their labor that they supply and their leisure that they would. Leisure just means not working in this case. You have 24 hours every day that you could budget to sleep and um, playing and working, studying for your economics quizzes. But at some point, it's a preference. You would prefer to spend more of your time working because you like having the money to buy goods and services that will increase your utility, or you would rather consume the leisure that you have, which is to not work. Um, but that's it. That's how labor supply is determined. Of course, um, Colin did say this. He needed the money. I don't know if he said he wanted the money or he needed the money, but we live in a capitalist country where everything is decentralized in terms of you're on your own to get enough money to survive. And for some people, the labor market is the only way to do that. So you have, let's see, labor supply is determined by the preferences of the individual workers who choose to work. Either maybe they're forced to, but they choose to supply labor and receive the benefits of that labor at a certain wage as opposed to consuming leisure. And it's really just a matter of preference. We, as economists, we can't predict that because we don't know people's preferences. We can estimate them, but we don't know them. Oops, how do I go down? Here's a summary of that. It's the combined hours people are willing to work at a given job at a certain wage. That's a much more succinct way to say it. For example, would you pick tomatoes for $100 per hour? I think you guys probably would, wouldn't you? $100 per hour? Like, heck yeah. I don't care what I'm picking. If you pay me $100 per hour, I will pick tomatoes. So you guys are actually part of the labor supply curve. I'm assuming you say yes to this. I don't know if I would say yes. I don't even know if I would say yes to this. I mean, probably. Um, but if you would, even if you wouldn't, you're part of the labor supply curve for agricultural jobs in like picking tomatoes. It's just that you're on the very high end wage. You're not willing to do it for $5 per hour. You're not willing to do it for $10 per hour. You may or may not be willing to do it for 15 or 20, but by the time you get up to $100 per hour, yeah, you probably would be. Even I probably would be. And maybe I would, just do it for a while and donate the money. I don't know. Now I probably just keep the money. It's hard to say. Okay. So these things all together determine the supply of labor or something called labor supply. One interesting thing about labor supply is that it can be backward bending. I said that it was upward sloping, and I really do believe it's upward sloping, as evidenced by this question about the tomatoes. You're not currently picking tomatoes, but if the wage went up, maybe you would say, you know what, I'm gonna leave VCU. I'm not gonna be a student anymore. I'm gonna go pick tomatoes for $100 per hour and live the easy life. Um, what is this? Guess you know what I mean by backward bending labor supply. This means if the wage gets high enough, you may actually supply less labor. Why? Any ideas? Like if let's say the tomato picking went from $100 per hour to $1,000 per hour, or $1 million per hour. $1 million per hour. at some
Wait, what was the
point,
question again?
oh, go ahead. Did you say
You,
something?
you said what was the question again?
Why would labor supply be backward bending? Backward, let me explain backward bending. It means the slope, as wage increases, the quantity supplied goes up, goes up, goes up until a certain point, then it starts going down. It starts to bend backwards. Maybe a picture would be better. Do you want me to try to draw it? I can try to draw it. I'm not the best at using whiteboards here. Let's see. I think I wanted to draw a labor supply curve anyway. So first, I kind of don't want to draw a pathological labor supply curve because you're going to think that's what they all look like. But I'm telling you now, this is not what they all look like. Text. This is wage. And this is quantity of labor supplied. Okay, so I'm gonna draw, I just want to like a normal pencil or something. Why do that? It's gonna think I want. Maybe this is it. So maybe a normal looking. So let's do a deeper dive here. What would a normal looking labor supply curve look like? Below a certain wage, it's gonna be zero. It doesn't go down to the origin, does it? I don't think so. Nobody's willing to work for a wage of zero. So even a wage slightly above zero, still nobody's willing to do that. There's a point here where it intersects, where that's like the least wage anybody would be willing to take in this particular industry. So I'll draw there, but it's upward sloping, right? Because as the wage goes up, more people are willing to supply that labor. Okay, I'm going to do the pathological case now that says in some industries, in some cases, if it gets high enough, it could actually start bending back like this. You see this? Move this my way. There we go. And the question is, why would it bend back like that? It's not, this isn't that big of an issue. I'll just tell you if nobody has a guess. It has to do with wealth effects. Wealth effects means kind of like if you get enough money, your behavior changes because your marginal utility of wealth goes down. Think of like really well-paid athletes. I mean, of course, they always want more money, but they don't necessarily want to keep working if they have enough money. They don't need. That's not the best analysis, but you may actually supply less labor if you get a wage that's so high that you're already getting enough income, and you'd actually rather spend more of that time with leisure. Kind of maybe a better way to think about this is like law firms where you have a period of time where you have to work really hard, 80 hours per week, maybe just to get ahead and make a partner. But then once you do and your wages go way up, you actually work a lot less. Even though you could work really hard still and try to get a lot of clients and make a lot of money for yourself, you become at a certain point where you actually want to work not as much. You want to have some time with your family. And anyways, that's why you can have backward bending wages. But ignoring that, they normally they go up right here. This would be you might call this the supply, S for supply, and then subscript L for labor. Sometimes you see that. Labor supply curve might look like that. For a particular industry. Good. And at each point on this curve, it represents the fact that because it's upward sloping, it represents the fact that as the wage gets higher, it becomes a more attractive option to work in this particular job. There's some people out there who think it's not worth it for me to pick tomatoes at $10 per hour, but for $15 per hour, maybe I will. And that's where this upward slope comes from. Okay, let me go back to meeting controls. No, oh man, I have to X that out. I would like to go back to the PowerPoint slides if I can. Um, okay, I mean, uh, I've already told you this. Like what determines the labor supply? The labor leisure trade off is a big one. I don't think I said this one yet. The outside option. You know what I mean by that? I would argue, especially if you're looking at a partial equilibrium framework, the outside option is a huge determinant of your labor supply. So let's go back to fast food in Richmond. What your outside option is determines whether you're willing to supply labor in this market at a given wage. And oftentimes outside option is just, it's hard to define. It's really the next best thing you could do. If you weren't working in this particular market, what else could you do? It might be going to school, getting some human capital, which is what you guys are doing right now. It might be this leisure. You don't feel like doing anything. Play video games with your friends all day. Or it could be working at some other job that pays a definite wage. Like, okay, I could work $10 an hour at this other job. So I'm not going to work in the fast food industry at $9 per hour if my outside option is to do something else for $10 per hour. But this outside option for each worker is a determinant. It's almost like a minimum. I'm not going to take anything less than that, than my outside option. If you give me more utility than my outside option, I will choose it, but it's sort of a minimum. And then once you get above this outside option, there's the labor leisure trade-off. I'll work here, but only so much. Okay? That's how we economists like to think of labor supply. It's my one slide summary of it. And I've taken a lot of time to get to it. What about labor demand? Where does labor demand come from? What do you think? Anybody have any ideas? How is it determined? Where does the demand for labor come from? Maybe there's no demand for labor. Oh no, we're in trouble. No one will hire us. The class of 2020 is doomed. You guys aren't the class of 2020, probably. 2021, 2022. Nobody knows how labor's demand is determined. Womp womp, sad trombone. My son's playing trombone, so pretty soon he'll be able to. Firms willing to hire, thank you. Why are they willing to hire you? And at what price, what wage are they willing to hire you? Where does that come from? Ria, thank you. You gave me a little nugget of participation, and now I crave more. More participation, more. Firms willing to hire. That's the right answer. But how does a firm decide whom to hire and at what wage? And how many hours to allow that person to work? This is taking too long. I'm going to have to just say, you guys, this is like a game of chicken. You know you can wait me out because ultimately I'm the one who really wants to get through this lesson. And it's a Zoom meeting, so what am I going to do? If I had you to stare down in like face to face, I bet I could make you participate. Okay. Based on the wage you're willing to pay an employee to complete a certain task. Okay. That's true. The question I was looking for was why. Why are they willing to do that? It's profit, right? Firms don't hire people just out of sense of decency. It's the right thing to do. There may be some firms out there who are socially conscious, and let's say during the pandemic, they continue to hire people even though their business is doing poorly. I have heard stories of people who do exactly that. And of course, there are these government programs to help save businesses during the pandemic. But normally, firms hire you because it's profitable to hire you. Why is it profitable to hire you? Because you generate revenue for the firm. If I hire you, whatever it is you're doing for the firm, you're helping produce goods and services that somebody out there is willing to pay for. And because of that, because being paid for whatever it is you're doing and the firm is getting paid for it, that's called revenue. It's generating revenue. So how do they decide who they want to hire and for how much? It's based on your revenue. How much revenue do you bring in? Is a firm ever going to pay more than the revenue that you bring in? And I have to give you this term now. It's called marginal revenue product. Marginal revenue product. What does that mean? That is the additional revenue produced, marginal revenue product, by an individual worker in a firm. So like, let's say you're working in a firm, they generate a certain amount of revenue. If we took you away from the firm, like the firm is exactly the same except you don't show up, you're gone, and compare that, the difference between the firm with you and without you is called the marginal revenue product. And there are various ways of calculating it and analyzing in economics, but let's forget about that and just say you're a worker, you have a certain marginal revenue product. The reason the word product is not just marginal revenue, but marginal revenue is a term that's already used to talk about the additional revenue generated from quantity, an increase in the quantity produced. So we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about marginal revenue product, which is how much an individual produces for the firm in terms of revenue. I'm going to make a very, I think, uncontroversial claim right now. A firm will never give you a wage higher than your marginal revenue product per hour. Whatever your wage is, dollars per hour, it will never, ever be higher than your marginal revenue product per hour. I say that, okay, I said never, ever, but of course, remember I said there's these socially conscious firms that continue to hire people even when times are tough. Ignoring that, do you agree? Here, let me state this in the chat. I would say this: the maximum wage a worker can earn is their marginal revenue product per hour. Right? This is just a simple fact of accounting. And remember my question, my bullet point. I don't know what I'm talking about. I need to always, whenever I go to full screen, my computer clock disappears. So the question is, how is labor demand determined? Well, I'm just telling you right now the maximum somebody is willing to pay. A firm is willing to pay. It has this term, marginal revenue product. I say per hour because I'm talking about wages per hour. If it were per year, you could do per year, but whatever. Oftentimes we think of wages as being per hour. Okay, you agree with this? Maybe you didn't know what marginal revenue product was before this lecture, but now that I've told it to you, it makes sense. A firm, if they pay more than your marginal revenue product per hour, they're losing money by hiring you. They would be better off not hiring you, asking you not to come to work ever again, and they would make more profit that way. And unfortunately, that's probably the best way to think about a firm. It's not a charity that hires people just because it's the right thing to. It's it's nice to hire people because it means they have a job. Capitalism punishes firms that do that. Firms that exist to perform some sort of charitable cause and ultimately lose money because of it, eventually they'll lose all the money that they have and will disappear and will be replaced by firms with a positive profit bottom line. At least that's kind of the sad takeaway from this. Okay, okay, so that we're now talking about how labor demand is determined. That's one thing. What else is there? Of course, let me go to the slides. Um, okay, let me give you the summary here of what labor demand is. It's the combined hours of labor that firms in an industry are willing to hire at a certain wage. Gosh, I'm not going to get, okay, so labor demand is mostly determined by these two factors, the marginal product and the marginal demand for your product. If you put those together, you get marginal revenue product. I didn't say that, but I feel like just skipping this fact that marginal revenue product itself can be decomposed. Think of marginal revenue product as the additional revenue that you as a worker provide for your firm. Okay, so do I have time? Do I have time? Oh, it's 10:47. Okay, so the demand for labor is downward sloping. And this is determined by, this is D for demand, L for labor. This is determined by the additional worker's marginal revenue product. Each additional worker that you hire, they have a lower marginal revenue product because you're already doing what you can with the workers you have. If you have 3 people working at McDonald's, they can produce a certain amount of food. If you have 4 people working, if you have 5 people working, the additional benefit of each worker goes down. And therefore, the marginal revenue product of each additional worker goes down. As this quantity of labor increases, the wage that you're willing to, the maximum wage that you're willing to spend on each worker has to go down as well. I'm really running out of time, and I wanted to just, this whole lecture was about this graph here. Where the supply of labor comes from and where the demand for labor comes from. Together, what happened to my, together they determine the equilibrium wage, which is the point where they intersect. And this equilibrium wage, I'm going to go really quick here to talk about immigration. This equilibrium wage is the wage for everyone, right? Everyone in the market, if they're paid anything other than the equilibrium wage, then someone can come around and say, wait, let me hire you for this. And then, it's an equilibrium because all of the market forces are pushing you there towards the equilibrium. What happens when the market opens, when borders open and there's a huge influx of workers who are willing to supply labor to this graph? Let's just look, I know it's 10:50. I'll do this in just a few minutes. What does the graph look like when there's a huge incoming supply of labor? What happens to the wage? Let's go back to the whiteboard. Anybody answer this real quick? So this SL is old. Let me draw it in a different color, maybe. Here in red, I will draw the new. I doubt they're willing to work, but it looks maybe something like this. This is the supply of labor. I'll put a prime here. The prime means after. So this blue dot is the equilibrium wage, is this point here, W, and this is the new equilibrium wage. So I guess here's W prime because it's prime because it comes from S prime there. There is an effect in the market when you increase the equilibrium wages do go down. In this particular industry, they go down. And some people are really mad about that, right? They don't like having a lot of immigration into their country if it means their wages are going to be decreased. And for domestic workers in an industry that usually unskilled labor is able to provide supply labor, that there is an effect. And we can talk about this on Friday. But I guess maybe to wrap this up, that's only one side of the story. Because when people come into your country and are supplying labor, it does depress the wages in that particular industry, but it could provide a lot more economic activity in other sectors too. People who live here are going to buy products from here. So I didn't tell you at all what happens to the demand. Maybe because they're buying so many products, the demand for labor also increases. If the demand for labor sort of increases in the same way that the supply increases, then maybe wages won't change at all. Those are empirical questions. I would love it if the people who are debating this topic on Friday come at this question with some data. Try to figure out what actually happens when borders open. But this, for the rest of us that have to say what we think about this and give our homework, it took me a long time to get to it, but I do think that opening borders does decrease wages in a lot of industries, in particular industries where there's easy entry into that market. But that's not the whole story. We'll talk more about the other side of the story. I think we should end there. Anybody have any questions? We're not going to have a quiz on Friday. I think we should have a quiz over labor markets, but you know what? Maybe we'll do it after the minimum wage. So we'll sort of combine minimum wage and immigration and labor markets all into one quiz, and we'll do it next Friday. Okay. Is there any questions?